What's going on, Nasteey Nation? It's Nasteey, and today I'm going to be going over every single aspect of the champion Nami. This guide is going to include skill order, build paths, counter picks, combos, and many more things. In case you're unaware, I've already made guides in the past for Rakan, Morgana, Taric, and Brand, but if there is another champion that you'd like to see me cover on this channel, then feel free to let me know by dropping a comment down below. I even did a guide on Nami at one point in time, but that's extremely outdated by now, and I think that's why I decided to remake this guide and make it up to date. Be sure to leave a like on the video if you do go on to enjoy it, but without further ado, let's get into it. Nami is a fan favorite in the League of Legends community. She is a fun yet somewhat challenging champion that can be played by beginners, but still manage to stand out when in the hands of a skilled player. She's a very versatile champion, gifted with the ability to play aggressive in lane while looking for kills, or play safe in lane and focus on sustaining. She can also peel for allies with ease, while also having the playmaking potential to have a large impact in teamfights. Overall, Nami is just a very well-rounded and solid champion that is perfect for anyone looking to climb the solo queue ladder. Nami's passive is Surging Tides. Whenever Nami casts an ability on an ally, they are granted a burst of movement speed. This isn't something that you have to pay too much attention to, but rather something to just keep in the back of your mind at all times. This can help you get back to lane quicker or run away from enemies. If you're looking to grant movement speed on you as well as your ally, you should cast Q on top of yourself, and if you'd like to grant movement speed to an individual, you should cast E because it costs less mana than your W does. Nami's Q is Aqua Prison. It's a circular skill shot that can be used to send multiple targets airborne. It can be somewhat tricky to land, but devastating when done so. This ability is especially useful in lane, specifically to deny CS under tower, set up ganks, or trade safely behind your minion wave. Using Q after a target is already locked down by another form of crowd control is typically most optimal, but of course that won't always be possible. Nami's W is Ebb and Flow. This ability heals allies while damaging enemies, and bounces up to 3 times with the effectiveness lowering after each bounce. When trading, use it on yourself first if your intention is to heal yourself more, and use it on the enemy if you want to do more damage, giving the first bounce will be at its strongest. This can be used aggressively for trading or passively for sustaining. Be sure not to spam it too often in the early game though, or you will run out of mana fairly quickly. Nami's E is Tidecaller's Blessing. This ability increases the damage on an ally's next 3 auto attacks and also allows these auto attacks to apply a small slow. You can use this on yourself in trades by auto attacking and then casting it on yourself while the auto is still in mid-air. Later on into the game, this will turn into more of an ADC steroid, as you ideally want to apply this to your ADC as frequently as possible in teamfights. You can, however, still use this on any champion that auto attacks frequently, such as a melee champion like Irelia or Camille. Nami's R is Tidal Wave. This ability casts a fairly slow and long-range wave that briefly knocks up and slows enemies. The knockup duration will always be the exact same, but the slow following the knockup increases depending on the distance that the wave travels before it connects with an enemy. This is a decent ability by itself, but when comboed with Nami's Q, you can create a pretty solid CC chain. I'll go more in depth as far as how to properly combo these abilities together later on in the video. When it comes to the best rune page on Nami, things are pretty set in stone. For champion guides in the past, I've always done my best to cover every single viable rune page possible for each champion, but in this situation, this is the only rune page that really works for Nami, and it's the only rune page that you will see across the board for both pro players and challenger players. This page starts off in the sorcery page, with Aerie being the go-to keystone. Following that, we have Mana Flow Band, Celerity, and Scorch. Aerie is an obvious choice here for most caster supports, given it provides the occasional extra damage or shield. In the earlier stages of the game, this keystone is used to enhance the ability to trade in lane, but later on it is essentially used strictly to help carries stay alive easier. Nami's kit is very flexible, and thus her abilities usually have a decent use at any given time. This causes Nami players to run into mana problems quite often, which is why Mana Flow Band is another obvious choice. This rune will gradually increase Nami's mana pool as the game progresses, allowing her to spam her abilities slightly more often. Celerity is once again another obvious choice. This rune synergizes really well with just about all caster supports, and Nami is no exception. And to wrap up the sorcery page, there is Scorch, which is a useful rune when it comes to applying more damage while looking to pick up early kills in the lane phase. As for the secondary page, I would recommend opting for the Resolve tree with Bone Plating and Revitalize. To the best of my knowledge, Riot doesn't plan on changing up the rune pages too much heading into Season 9. but bone plating is one rune that they have already announced that they do have a plan to replace it. That is one rune that may be changed in the future according to this rune page, but for now Nami can surely get the most of it. And to finish up the rune page, we do have Revitalize, which is just going to help Nami's heal do a little bit more healing whenever using it on an ally with low health. In just about all of my champion guides, I'm pretty straightforward when it comes to what summoner spells you should be taking on the champion, but when it comes to Nami, they can vary. As I stated earlier in the video, Nami can fit both an aggressive playstyle and a passive playstyle. I prefer honestly to play her aggressively and look for kills in lane, thus I would recommend Flash and Ignite. At the same time though, I do understand not everyone feels comfortable with that playstyle, and so if you do plan on playing a passive Nami throughout the lane phase and onto the mid to late game, I would definitely recommend taking Flash and Exhaust, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that as well. Next up, I'd like to cover when Nami is best picked. Nami is a champion who provides a ton of utility while also packed with something I like to call follow-up engage. Her two abilities that provide crowd control are her Q and her ultimate, and although they are very useful when landed, the animations to both of these abilities are very slow, and thus they can be very easy for the enemy to sidestep. Therefore, Nami is best picked when your team already has hard engage, such as a Zac or Sejuani locked in on your team, because these are the type of champions that can lock down carries, then giving you the window to follow up on the engage and land your crowd control for free, given you are able to time it correctly. This isn't going to be the case 100% of the time, of course, but in a picture perfect scenario, that is how you would ideally want to play out a fight in game with your abilities layered on top of an already locked down target. The other scenario that Nami fits very well into is when against assassin champions like Talon or Zed, due to her ability to peel efficiently. Her passive grants allies consistent movement speed, her W provides a heal to outlast burst, and her E applies a small slow. All of these put together can turn any champion into a crazy fast kiting machine, which is the perfect counter to these assassin champions. In my opinion, Nami is one of the best possible supports to pick when on a team with hard engaged champions, so although she does work in both scenarios pretty well, taking advantage of her ability to follow up on engage is definitely the better option. As for when not to pick Nami, it's a little bit more simple. The only time I would recommend not picking Nami is if you are matched up against a hard engage bot lane, something like a Leona, an Alistar, or Blitzcrank or Thresh. These are champions that have high kill pressure in the early stages of the game, and Nami is fairly immobile, so it can be fairly difficult just to survive in these lane phases. Let's move on now and talk a little bit about the build path for Nami. Spell Thieves and Coin are both seen as very viable starting items for Nami, but Spell Thieves surely has a slight edge. It is seen as the slightly more aggressive option, but if you play Nami properly, you should be able to get the most out of the additional ability power and gold generation that it provides whenever you trade with an enemy. When it comes to buying boots on Nami, we again have two viable options, which are going to be mobility boots and CDR boots. CDR is certainly a valuable statistic for Nami, but as you'll go on to see from the rest of this build path, we do eventually cap off on our CDR, so it isn't necessarily a priority item. Instead, I would recommend getting Mobies as a way to grant bonus movement speed outside of combat and encourage yourself to roam more often. For a very long time, Redemption was my go-to third item on Nami, but after doing a little bit of research, I discovered that Ardent Sensor next in the build path has a slightly higher win rate, believe it or not. The Ardent meta is long gone and dead, but it still suits Nami quite nicely. With the help of Aerie, Ardent can be given to carries both with Nami's W and her E, and the additional AP gives her even more kill pressure when you do complete this item, if you are able to do so fairly early on into the game. Next up in the build path is an item that I just previously mentioned, which is Redemption. Redemption will increase the effectiveness of Nami's heal, grant an AoE heal in teamfights, and will cap off the build at 40% CDR. Pretty straightforward. Now that we are capped off on CDR though, we don't need to prioritize items that do offer that statistic, which is why we opt for Locket next. This is going to provide a little bit of armor, a little bit of magic resist, and some more power in teamfights, given it does grant that AoE shield. The final item in the build path will vary from game to game. You don't typically get to 6 items as support, so you don't really need to worry about it all that much, but let's say your game drags out really long. At this point in the game, you just want something that is going to help your team in that very specific situation. For example, let's say the enemy team has a lot of AP damage. Maybe you want something like Unholy Grail for the magic resist. If the team has a mixture of AP and AD, maybe you want something like Zeke's to have a little bit of both resistances. Let's say their team is fairly heavy on AD. Maybe you want something like Knight's Vow for the extra armor and health, even though you will only be getting 50% of the effectiveness as a caster support. Or maybe the enemy team has a lot of crowd control, so you want something like Crucible to be able to free one of your allies from crowd control. All of these options that I mentioned do work, and I'm sure there's some other options out there that also work. But again, just be mindful of the game situation that you're in and adapt and buy an item that is going to help you in that specific game. Next up, let's talk about the lane phase. You're going to want to start off the game with a point in W. This allows you to heal your jungler up a bit after leashing and then get into lane and start trading immediately. In my opinion, Nami is one of the strongest level 1 supports in the entire game. And this isn't necessarily because she has crazy damage output or strong all-in potential. Nami isn't going to pick up a level 1 kill or chunk the enemy to half health or anything crazy along those lines, but rather she is just going to win trades by neglecting damage taken. All you have to do is walk up level 1, auto the carry a few times, then use your W grabbing a heal and use the movement speed to back out. Rinse and repeat this and you should get yourself a little bit of an edge in the lane. If you do this properly, you can completely get priority on the lane just through the small health advantage you slow the game from frequently trading. At level 2, I'd recommend leveling up E in passive lanes and Q in aggressive lanes. For example, let's say you're up against a Soraka and a Jinx lane. At level 2, you probably want to take Q, look to land a bubble, and go for an extended trade or potential all-in. On the other hand, let's say you're up against a Leona and Draven lane that gets a pretty good power spike come level 2. In a situation like this is when it would be wiser to take the passive approach and just level up E. If you take Q, use it, and miss it, then you immediately open yourself up to getting engaged upon. So again, in these situations, it's better to be safe than sorry and level up the more passive ability. The final and most important thing that I'd like to mention about Nami's lane phase revolves around landing your Q. Anytime you're looking to go all in or just set up a gank, your Q is going to be your go-to initiation. But as I stated earlier, both Nami's crowd control abilities are incredibly slow and unlikely to land if you just carelessly throw them at an enemy. If you've watched any of my previous videos, then you know that there is a way though that you can almost guarantee your skill shot to land despite how slow the animation may be. This tactic works practically on any champion, but it's especially important on Nami. The key is to wait for the enemy champion to go for a last hit on a creep and then aim your Q on the spot that they will be standing in that split second while auto attacking. This works extremely well with cannon minions because the odds of them going for a last hit on it is even more likely. On top of this, you generally want to aim your Q slightly behind them. Their first natural reflex to dodging the skill shot will be backwards, which should result in them walking right into it. And if they decide to walk forward in order to dodge the ability, they then open themselves up to free harassment and put themselves in an overall awkward situation. Also, if it's up against a champion like Lucian, then throwing your Q slightly behind them can potentially stop their movement mid-animation. It does take some practice to get used to, and it's for sure the most important aspect of Nami's playmaking potential in lane, so I recommend you try it out and get used to it as fast as possible. Next up, I want to talk about combos, and there's actually only one combo for Nami, so this won't be something that I dive too far into. And that combo is going to be the QR combo or the RQ combo. As I've already mentioned, these abilities are both decent when used alone, but when you pile them together and combo them and layer them correctly, you do get a pretty solid CC chain. I would say that it is easier to combo this if you start with the Q, but of course landing the R is somewhat easier at times. So either way, as soon as the CC is about to end, the duration of the crowd control that is about to end, make sure you throw out your other ability and it should give you a solid CC chain. Once you have picked up mobility boots, roaming becomes fairly easy as Nami. I have an entire video actually dedicated to roaming as efficient as possible, so I would highly recommend you check that out if you haven't already. But for now at least, let's focus on how to roam with Nami specifically. Prior to hitting level 6, you would ideally want to use your E and the slow that it provides in order to set up for your Q. If the enemy is slightly overextended, the chances of this landing a kill or at least blowing a summoner spell is pretty likely. If you have already hit 6 when roaming, use your tidal wave from the jungle slightly behind them in order to cut off their exit path. If the enemy is not overextended enough for a gank, you can always settle for some deep warding in the enemy jungle before heading back bot instead of forcing a play mid. Speaking of mid, in the mid to late game, Nami excels in just about every situation. Her kit provides her with the tools to engage, disengage, zone, roam, and have an overall large impact in team fights. Given all of these, playing around objectives is where Nami stands out most. Let's take a look at a Baron play, for example. If you're looking to peel off Baron with your team and force a fight, you can do so with your long range ultimate and meet the enemy if they try to contest. If the Baron call is looking sketchy or maybe somebody gets picked off randomly, you can use your ult to stall and use the rest of your abilities to speed up your team and get out. If you're afraid of a Baron steal, you can use both your Q and your ult to try to either lock down the enemy jungler and prevent him from entering the pit, or at least force him to sidestep and zone him away from the pit entirely. Outside of playing around objectives though, you can also continue to use your ability to roam and rotate to help other lanes, or just siege down the towers. And finally, the last thing to emphasize on regarding Nami's mid game is team fighting. Nami usually really serves as a safer role in teamfights, staying in the far back with your carries and providing buffs to allies, while simultaneously trying to CC enemy tanks or assassins that threaten your backline. Make sure to always keep an eye out for your ally with the lowest health, and give them your W whenever it's up, but prioritize carries at all cost. If your tank and mid laner are both sitting at around 10% HP, it would be wiser to heal your mid laner, because they have a higher chance to carry the remaining of the team fight. You should also try to spam your E as frequently as possible, preferably on your ADC, but using it on any champion that frequently auto attacks works fine as well. Do be sure to avoid using your E on champions who don't auto often, such as a champion like Xerath, because you won't be getting the most out of the ability. Your Q and your R should always be used to CC as many people as possible in teamfights as well. Luckily, in these teamfights, your Q is much easier to land because the enemy is going to be focusing on multiple enemies rather than just the one. Use it mainly to peel off frontline threats while also using your ult to do the same. If you line up your ult properly though, you can manage to knock up the enemies in the backline as well in the process. I know that might have been a lot to take in, but if you do take all of these things into account, put them all together, you can be an absolute monster on Nami when it does come to team fighting in the mid to late game. Alright ladies and gentlemen, that is going to complete this Nami Challenger Champion guide. I put a lot of time, effort, and research into making this guide, so if you did find this to be helpful or if you learned something new, please consider dropping a like, commenting down below, and subscribing to help the channel grow. Also be sure to check out my Discord, Twitter, and Patreon on your way out. Links to all of them will be down in the description. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.